High five, okay?
Yeah.
Good, good.
Yeah.
You know, hang
You
on
know.
there. These are good.
I love it.
Good.
You've got opening today.
We always do this.
I know, we match, yeah?
Wow.
So
Yeah, we
a little
didn't-
on the creepy
Didn't get
side.
the memo.
But it's okay, whatever. It's fine.
Oh, hey, we're on video right now, too.
That's
Very
All
nice.
right.
That's great.
I'd like to call the March 21st, 2019 City Council meeting to order. We're going to have an opening provided to us by Councilmember Michelle Barber.
Thank you. I've actually asked a member of our community, Doug Adela, to get the opening for us.
Okay. Let us pray. Our most kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we're indeed thankful to be here for this opportunity to assemble together, to be about the business of the city. We pray that you will be with our leaders, our elected leaders, that you will empower them with the wisdom and the knowledge to do the right things and make the right decisions for the citizens. And we just thank you for all the many blessings we enjoy. We're Americans and we have beautiful lives and enjoy many riches and wonderful things. And we just thank you so much for this city of Kaysville, which is such a wonderful place to live in. We ask it all in Christ's name. Amen.
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 Could you do that?
Oh, yes. Let's wait. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. All right. I'm going to change something. We have a proclamation to read today declaring April to be Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And I'm going to read this, and Alana Cloud is here to receive that, and then we'll have her give some comments. Okay, whereas the month of April is recognized as Sexual Assault Awareness Month in the United States, and whereas April 2019 is the 18th anniversary of Sexual Assault Awareness Month with the theme Embrace Your Voice, to apprise all individuals on how they can use their words to promote safety, respect, and equality to stop sexual violence before it happens. And whereas the goal of Sexual Assault Awareness Month is to raise public awareness about sexual violence and educate communities on how to prevent it. And whereas prevention is possible, the City of Kaysville welcomes the opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to end sexual violence and to embrace our voice to create a safe and respectful community. And now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Katie Witt, Mayor of Kaysville City, Utah, along with Kaysville City Council, do hereby proclaim April 2019 as Kaysville City Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Thank you. And then, Alana, are you here? Would you like to say a couple of things? Yeah, come up to the mic.
Thank you so much, Mayor Witt, for supporting Sexual Assault Awareness Month this April with your proclamation, and thank you, City Council members, for having me tonight to share a few words about our activities planned for Sexual Assault Awareness Month and a little bit of the background around why this campaign is important for our community. So as you read, Sexual Assault Awareness Month happens every April, and last year, Safe Harbor Crisis Center was proud to support and offer the first official Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaign in Davis County. We saw a lot of success and a lot of support from our community, and this year we're really excited to get to expand those events with both a few new ones that we're starting this year, as well as repeating a few events that some of our community members here may have seen around late in last year. So For anyone who isn't aware, Safe Harbor Crisis Center is the first and only domestic violence and sexual assault service provider in Davis County. We live right here in Kaysville, where we're started as a domestic violence shelter and soon expanded to include sexual assault services for survivors, including crisis response team to be able to support survivors in their most critical time of need after experiencing trauma. Sexual violence is a hard problem to talk about for many folks, but it's something that if we don't start talking about it, it's going to be really hard to do something about it. So again, so grateful for all of you allowing us the space to share awareness with our community and to get the word out there about what we can all do to help end the violence and support survivors. So this year for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, one campaign that all of you will see around is our Paint the Town Teal campaign. So throughout Kaysville, Layton, and Bountiful, we'll have a number of volunteers go out on March 30th to tie bright teal ribbons around several prominent areas, main streets here in Kaysville. We have the proud support of Chief Oberg and the police department, as well as the city council, and we'll be tying teal ribbons down Main Street. So you'll all notice those go up throughout April, and just really a visible statement that as a community and as a city, Kaysville will not stand for sexual violence and that we support survivors. So that is one campaign that we're definitely still looking for volunteers for. So if any folks want to come join these efforts, that will be taking place on March 30th from 8:30 to 11. We'll be meeting at Great Harvest in Layton, and then spreading out to our different locations from there. Coming up after that, we'll have actually, throughout the month of April, there's going to be a portrait exhibit at Layton Hills Mall that will be spotlighting 14 different survivors from the community in some beautiful black and white photographs, as well as sharing some personal survivor statements. And this campaign is really to demonstrate the diversity and the resiliency of sexual assault survivors. We know that in Utah, 1 in 3 women will experience sexual violence in their lifetime. And this event is really to show that sexual violence does not discriminate. It absolutely affects men, women from all backgrounds, beliefs, and experiences. So that will be taking place throughout April. We encourage everyone to check out those photographs and make sure to, at the same time, be recognizing the need as a community to speak up against sexual violence and recognize the humanity of these survivors that have experienced oftentimes some very traumatic life events, but still found the courage to grow and move beyond their past abuse. So that'll happen all April. And then we'll also be holding an art showcase down in Bountiful at the Bountiful Davis Arts Center, where we'll be spotlighting survivor artwork with the theme Lost Words. So it's going to be a really powerful event. We've got some beautiful artwork from survivors that have really found healing through art when words have not been able to provide the space for the emotional kind of processing that art often does. So those are our main events for April. There's a few more, but the biggest thing that I want to make sure everyone knows today is that, again, sexual violence happens, but we all are able to do something about it by standing up for survivors, raising awareness, and getting the word out there that services exist for survivors here in Kaysville to help them recover and find a path to healing and creating a future free of violence. So
Right.
thank you so much again for
All
having
right.
us.
And I'd like to present this to you. And council, do you want to come get a picture?
Yeah.
All right, thanks. All right, now we're going to go on and we have our police chief, Chief Saul Oberg, to give us a report, and also Jennifer Winchester.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak for a few minutes tonight. I'm going to kind of try to keep it brief. I have with me our Victims Advocate Coordinator, Jennifer Winchester. She needs to report as well, just as part of her grant. I hope you've all had a chance to look at the annual report I prepared. My intent was to try to provide you with as much information as I could in case you have questions. I don't intend on going over the whole report. Like I said, I'm going to try to keep it brief, but I thought I'd highlight a couple of things for you. Our crime index, you may remember last year we spoke a little bit about that. That had gone up. It's gone back down again this year. I hope it's evening out for us. It went down about 18.5%. And one major or significant crime we've been dealing with more this year than past years is our child abuse and neglect calls. Those have gone up significantly, about 62%. So I'm not quite sure why that is or how to mitigate that or prevent that, but that's something we're looking at. The last thing I'll just mention is our traffic stops have gone up significantly. That's in due a large part to our dedication of a full-time traffic officer this year. As you all might remember, we were just starting that last year. I think it's been a very good program for us. Our traffic stops have almost doubled. We've gone up to a little over 7,000 from a little bit over 4,000. And our citations have gone up as well. And I don't know if Councilman Page will remember this or not, but about 2 years ago, when our traffic stops were down, you posed the question of, and at that same time our accidents had gone up, and you posed the question of whether there's a correlation there. And I thought that there probably was, and as we've kind of kept track of that, if you look at page 10, it shows our traffic stops from 2014 to 2018 on the top part of that page, and then it shows our accidents at the bottom of the page. And you can see it does appear that there's a direct correlation between the number of stops we make and the accidents we experience as a city. So I'm not sure it's enough to say there's causation there, but I think we were right. There's definitely some correlation there. So I think that's brought our traffic our traffic accidents down significantly. We're down to around the same numbers we were in 2014 and 2015 time area. So that's a success for us. It was a kind of a tough year for the police department, but it was a good year. We started out last spring with the fire at Chevron. You probably remember we lost a couple officers to some significant burns for a period of time. That hurt us staffing-wise, and just the amount of hours that it took to work that case. And about the same time, we lost another officer to an injury on a SWAT call, and we ended up losing him for about 10 months of duty service. And we also lost an officer to the military deployment, which is great. We love him in the military, and we support our troops and our veterans and what we're doing. But it does impact us on a local level as we're trying to do without his services. So we lost those, and then shortly after that, we had 3 of our most senior officers retire. And so we've really been running short and just kind of scrambling all year, trying to hire and trying to fill those spots. But I think we've turned out a great work product this year, and we've hired some great officers. One of those new officers we hired and swore in here. Before she could make it off of her training, she tried to do some training with the Utah Highway Patrol to improve her DUIs, and she was hit by a vehicle at about 55 miles an hour and sustained a lot of damage, injuries, and wasn't ever able to come back to work, and she ended up resigning because of that too. So that was hard on us emotionally, and also staffing, as far as our staffing goes. But we're moving forward and upward and onward. We received several accolades from different community groups and law enforcement groups. We were named the Department of the Year by Costco, and one of our assistant chief received a international award from the International Association of Chiefs of Police for his leadership. So we have some special people here, and we're doing some good work. But if you got any questions about anything I said or anything in this book, or any other feedback, anything I can address tonight?
Any questions, Council?
No.
Councilmember Page?
I guess the only, I can't thank you enough for the service. I know this has been a tough year with a lot of the things that's happening, but boy, what a great place to live in Kaysville with our crime rate so low, and it's amazing. We have 2 arsons and it goes up 200%. That just tells you where we're at. So, but I appreciate all the officers and their willingness to serve the community, and that's just one area we don't worry about, and I appreciate that very much.
Thank you, Councilman.
Councilmember Garner?
I'll second that, and not to regurgitate any of that, but I think we're really fortunate in Kaysville to have the quality of staff that we have that really reach out to the community, and I'm very grateful for what you and your people do. Thank you, to protect us and to serve us in the community.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Barber?
There was a report somewhere I saw about Kaysville being the safest city in the state.
I don't think we're the safest. I included, I think what you're talking about,
Yeah.
it should be on page 32. And this SafeWise organization ranked us as the 9th safest city in Utah.
Overall, the best.
Yeah.
There's like 200 and
Yeah,
something.
that's
So it's pretty
fantastic.
good.
So thank you.
Still pretty good.
Yeah, we did pretty
I
good.
think that's very
Let's see,
telling.
I think in 2017 we were the #1 safest, and in 2015 they had us at second.
that
So
was-
we're at least trying to keep up there.
No, that's great. But my other question was, so with those resignations and losing those officers, are we still have open positions we're trying to hire for?
Yes, yes. So we've we hired one young man, Rhett. You met him,
Yeah.
I think, last month. We just swore him in. He's just off of training, doing a great job. Since then we've had Lieutenant Pies is also retired, and we've been filling his position. So we haven't filled that yet. We've just been working through the promotional processes and promoted a new lieutenant in his place, and a new sergeant in his place. So, but we're working through the hiring process
Just that
right
one?
now. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And we have 2 that we've hired that you haven't yet met, and they're in the police academy right now. I think they started in January, and they'll be done May 5th.
All right.
Thank you.
So we have a lot of scouts here tonight. We would encourage you to look at policing as a career path. So if you want, talk to Chief Oberg. He'd be glad to talk to you.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. All right. Anything else? Anything? Okay.
And then if
Thanks,
you'll-
Jennifer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for having me. So part of the grant that I'm funded through requires that I just come and let everybody know how the program is doing. So just a quick refresher, the purpose of our program is to offer victims of crime emotional support, explain to them their rights and how to exercise them as we move through the criminal process, and really just connect them to all the resources that are available through the communities. There's no restrictions under the grant as far as what type of victims we can work with, so males, females, any age 0 to 100. As of today, we've worked with 375 victims since the program has started and provided about 1,500 services. There's not really a restriction, like I said, but we do have a lot of specific crime victims that we work with. For example, Since we've started, we've worked with 224 victims of domestic abuse or stalking, 32 victims of sexual assault, 66 child victims of physical abuse or sexual assault, and about 40 victims of some type of financial crime, burglary, theft, things of that nature. Of course, as with any project, it's been a learning curve since we've started. However, we have met all of the goals that are outlined in the grant program. Currently, the grant that we're funded through is going to expire in July, and we're in the process right now of reapplying for the next grant cycle. So, any questions?
I do have a question.
Okay.
Can you give me a story with no names of an incident where you really felt like you helped in a situation where you really felt like you were able to increase their outcomes, as it were?
Sure. Hopefully they're not watching because they might know who I'm talking about, but that's okay. We had a domestic violence victim who had about 8 incidences. She had been referred to Safe Harbor on multiple occasions. However, she knew some people that worked there, so it was uncomfortable. One of our officers met with her a few times, explained to her the dangers she was in. I called her on several occasions, just like, hey, how are you doing? Kind of, she warmed up to me, came in, met with me several times. We finally worked together. We put a protective order in place, helped her get some financing together to get moved out. She's currently separated from the abuser. She's got a new job, and she has 2 kids, and she's doing really well. I actually spoke with her a week ago, and this has been going on for about 2 years.
Yeah. So thank you. Thanks for what you're doing and making life better for Kaysville residents. We really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Anything else, Chief? All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Okay. Okay. Moving on in our agenda, declaration of any conflicts of interest. So anybody have any conflicts of interest tonight?
No.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Consent items. First of all, we took care of A. Would anybody like to move the consent agenda B through D?
I'll make a motion that we approve consent items B, C, and D.
Second the motion.
Okay. It's been moved by Councilmember DeCare, seconded by Councilmember Adams. Any questions?
No.
Any comments? All right, we'll go to a vote. Councilmember Adams?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes unanimously. Okay, we're going on to our action agenda items. First, request to rezone 1.31 acres of property at 1048 Tyler's Way from residential agriculture to R110 single-family residential zoning district. And Lyle?
If I may, Mayor, to keep all my notes here in front of me since I got my computer attached, I'll present here from my desk. By way of presentation, this particular request is on the west side of town, just essentially north of Centennial Junior High to orient yourself, west of Sunset over here off of Tyler's Way. The applicant came in some time ago with interest of splitting their lot. So there's an existing home and a large detached garage type building on the property. They have a total of about 1.3 acres on the property, and we're interested in keeping the home, but being able to ultimately kind of turn the existing detached garage building into a home itself. And since we don't allow more than one dwelling on a lot, it would have to be subdivided, each one to be put onto their own lot. Here you can see the existing zoning throughout the area. The particular property being looked at has the existing zoning of an RA, residential agricultural designation. That requires half-acre minimum lot sizes. They do have enough acreage to technically split that in half, but where we bumped into an issue of just a simple split without a rezone was frontage requirements. So the RA zone has a 100-foot frontage requirement at the 30 feet back from the street. And looking at different options of ways to accommodate it, maybe through a flag lot or others, it was determined that this would probably be the most appropriate way to go. It would give the council, through a discretionary rezone process, the ability to consider whether or not the subdivision were even appropriate. So the R110 zonings has been requested. Ultimately, this allows, again, to deal with the frontage situation. So just as an example, the applicants provided a concept plan showing the division of the property. The existing home is on the easterly or southern lot. Shows that it could meet a 90-foot frontage, which is typical and consistent with the neighborhood to the west of it that joins the same street. The larger lot that has the larger detached garage building as it currently stands would have a roughly 80-foot of frontage. So it would be slightly smaller than the others. The Planning Commission, of note, so the R110 zoning district has the same conditional and permitted uses as the surrounding neighborhood to the west. So all of our R1 districts, R18, 10, 20, and the like, allow the same usage. So it just becomes a different in lot size and lot frontage requirements, distinguishing those districts from one another. After holding a public hearing at the Planning Commission, they voted unanimously to forward a favorable recommendation to the City Council for the requested rezone. They did ask that it be done just to ensure that no more than 2 lots would be created. So for that purpose, a development agreement's been put in place where essentially what they're requesting is what you see and nothing more happens down the road beyond that. So with that, I'll happily pass it back to the council if you have any questions of myself. I do know the applicant is here as well if you have questions of them.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anybody signed up to speak to this item? No, you don't. Okay. All right, questions from council? Okay. I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to rezone 1.31 acres of property from residential agriculture to single-family residential R110 at 1048 West Tyler's Way, subject to development agreement limiting the total number of lots to 2.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilmember Garn, seconded by Councilmember DeCare. Any comments at this time? Councilmember Barber?
The limiting the lots to 2, that was in the original, what was presented to Planning Commission, right?
Correct. That is what's in the agreement before
Okay.
you.
I just want to make sure that was the same thing.
Okay. All right. Okay, ready to vote. Councilmember Page?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes unanimously. Okay, request to rezone 3 acres of property at 1576 West, 200 North from residential agricultural to R2, single and 2-family residential with the PRUD overlay zone. Lyle.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so to orient us again, just here on the map, you can see the property located directly west of the Smith's Marketplace, right off of 200 North and the DNRG rail trail on the east side of this property. The applicant has requested essentially to do a townhome type subdivision. They've been over multiple meetings working with the Planning Commission to refine their request. Essentially what we have before us this evening that was passed along by the Planning Commission is a proposal, and I'll go back and forth between these, to rezone the 3 acres of property that's with the bold yellow line that wraps around it to the R2 zoning district with the PRUD overlay. And they're also shown on their concept another roughly half an acre that's just north of that on another property. Originally it was part of the rezone consideration, kind of through the process. They had some townhomes on there originally that they were hoping to put in there. It was determined they wouldn't be able to put units on it, so they pulled it out, but still desired to include it together as some portion of the development, but would be utilized as open space. Shows trails and things on that particular area here just to kind of identify and orient yourself, whether they would do fields or something different, but again, it would go from the weed lot to some improved space. Right now before you have a proposal with 29 units on the 3 acres of property. Ultimately over the couple public hearings that were held and the meetings with the neighbors and through the Planning Commission, It was recommended for approval, as you can see here, with some specifics that have come together through a development agreement as well. And I'll just get into that to highlight some of the key items of that as to what it calls for, and then speak a little more on the process and what you have before you this evening. So under essentially the Section 2 of the development agreement, there are several standards that are listed. So again, through the PRUD overlay ordinance, it allows them, should the council agree, to develop with some flexibility within the zone. The PRUD, in short, within the ordinance, it says it could be granted if it creates development that is desirable or could be done better than would otherwise happen without the overlay zone and the flexibility that it offers. So it allows for some of that flexibility with setbacks, and the location one in particular to highlight is on the north edge of the property. So those townhomes essentially butt right up against the solid yellow line on the north edge of the property. But there would still be a buffer with that open space that would be provided. So technically it's a zero setback. However, there is the additional space of that open space from other properties. So project-wise, it has the spacing. Setback-wise, it requires consideration through the development agreement. Number of units was limited with the existing agreement to 29. Ties the proposal to the architecture has been presented, and limits the building height, just as with others, to 30 feet within there. The Planning Commission, as they made their recommendation, requested that there be multiple connections to the trail to the east, as it does butt up against the DNRG rail trail. They requested also that the developer provide, as required by fire code, a turnaround of sorts on the stub road, which is on the southeast side of the project. Speaking with the fire chief, he, again, as a concept, it's a little difficult for us as staff to determine exactly how everything fits with code, where we don't have all the engineering and dimensions and radii and such that are shown in there. But the comment that was received on that one is it may not be necessary, as the road itself kind of functions as a fire turnaround. But again, that could be looked at with the specific subdivision if we're heading this direction as we get to that specific stage. The Planning Commission also asked for additional parking, a minimum of 8 additional guest parking stalls. So the agreement requires each proposed unit would have a 2-car garage based on the developer's proposal. They also have driveways that the developers agreed to keep at least, make sure I get the correct dimension to you, I think it's 22 feet.
Minimum
we'll find. Is it 20?
Minimum.
So a 20-foot minimum driveway distance from the private street improvements. Appreciate that, Councilman Adams. So those items of consideration, one, are currently what's in there based on what the Planning Commission's recommended and proposed. But just give an example of what kind of flexibility also that the City Council has in this consideration. So as a rezone request, it is a legislative decision. You have broad discretion. Again, as you're looking at it, how does it meet the provisions and language of the general plan? How does it work in this specific location in this area? With the PRUD overlay in particular, is it meeting the intent of that ordinance in your perspective? And should you be inclined to make any changes to this or stick with it, just we would request that you be very specific to us, and we'd be happy to add those. And again, you can get highly creative on what you do and do not want to see in the development, should you be inclined to head down that path. Again, the public hearings have been held at the Planning Commission level as well, but if there is interest, and probably sign up from the City Council, and interest to hear from others, we do that this evening. If the applicant is available, I'm happy to continue going, or probably leave it at this to hear from them and the developer, then be willing to take any questions you may have moving forward this evening.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll move to our public hearing. And just so you know, You get 3 minutes. I'm very strict about the 3-minute rule. There's no clapping, no booing. We want everybody who comes to City Council meeting to share their perspective to feel welcome. And the first person that we have on the list is David Hershey.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, it's a pleasure to be here. I represent Elton and Mary Over. I'll make my remarks brief. I understand that a zoning change is not where you deal with a lot of details, but it does open the door for subdivision, and so some of the issues that I'll discuss tonight I think should be considered by the council in order to make a wise and prudent decision here. 3 points I'd like to make tonight. First of all, the conceptual plan proposed by the developer is flawed. Secondly, the development agreement that's been prepared and attached to your packet is incomplete. And third, there are violations, we believe, in the land use ordinances of Kaysville, as well as just violations of best practices all around in some of the proposals. So let me hit each of those individually. First of all, there are some flaws in the conceptual plan. One thing that you'll notice is that the patios on the northernmost portions of those homes sits on top of a dedicated public easement. It's a dedicated public easement as part of the Greenland Estate subdivision. Secondly, drainage is not provided for other than potentially this pond in the middle, which there's nothing really in the development agreement that talks about safety issues, mosquitoes, and how that's going to be administered or whether it's even sufficient. Secondly, we know that there's some parking issues with the 3 acres that are being rezoned, and while there are some open space requirements in the development agreement, there's nothing in the development agreement, I don't believe, that prohibits overflow parking into that area. I'll get to the reason that that's a big issue a little bit later. Secondly, the plan is incomplete. There's no restrictions on the use of the park, if that's what it is, the half-acre park on the north. We don't know for sure what kind of fencing is going to be in there. It talks about vinyl fencing. There's no sound attenuation. There's no lighting attenuation in the development agreement. There's no privacy fencing mentioned there. Basically, that park opens up to the backyards of a number of residences right there in the Greenland Estate subdivision, and so we're very concerned about the security. Again, lighting and noise are not addressed. Lastly, I'd like to talk about good land practices. This is a half an acre parcel that's already subject to a subdivision. Are we imposing another subdivision on top of an existing subdivision? We have CC&Rs in the Greenland Estate subdivision. Are those going to be administered by the new HOA for the condo subdivision? Who's going to administer that? Will the neighborhood lose control over enforcing their own CC&Rs, or will this be subject to the CC&Rs?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Steve Einfeld, please.
Thank you. I'm Steve Einfeld, and I'm here representing my wife. She's not able to be here. She is teaching a class tonight. We've written a letter together. She has timed it. It is under 3 minutes when she reads it. When I read it, it may not be. It may just be a little longer, but I'd like to get through it. The only way we truly make progress in our society is with compromise, especially with controversial issues. Each side has to give up part of what they want. The residents of West Kaysville, especially long-timers, have put most of their financial assets into their homes, yet have been forced to give up a lot over the past several years. And we know we'll suffer even more loss in the future. But there are ordinances that have protected us to some degree, both in financial and lifestyle aspects. Now, even that threshold of protection is being threatened. With the green property, most of us assumed that 3 or 4 homes might be built in the field next to Jay's home. I don't think any of us envisioned the house being torn down. No one, and I mean no one, could have foreseen 29 townhomes or condos being built. That represents nearly 10 homes per acre. The current zoning of the property is A1 with 1 home per acre. So the drastic proposal is asking to increase the current density by 990%. But most folks would probably not fight even 1/3 or perhaps 1/4 acre lots. That would still be a 200% increase in density. But over 9 houses per acre, where is the compromise on the part of the Greens or the part of the developer? That puts all the burden on the current homeowners and neighbors, and nothing but wealth falls to the other parties. There is no compromise at all with this proposal. One of the valued protections under our divinely inspired Constitution is private property rights. Property owners have the right to use their property for its current use, but there is no guarantee that they will be granted a change in use. Another wonderful thing about our democratic republic is citizens' right to petition government and to fight for the well-being of themselves and their communities. In that preamble, we are reminded that 2 roles of government are to ensure domestic tranquility and promote general welfare. This is tricky because of the diverse needs and wants of so many citizens. It is accomplished nearly always through compromise. And we still need answers. What about the proximity to the gas line? Seymour Drive neighbors need to, or deserve a right to know that they won't be at greater risk of flooding. All homeowners in the area deserve their property right values, their quality of life preserved.
Thank you. Can you give us the letter and we'll pass along and read it?
I think she has sent most of it
Okay.
to you,
So-
but we did want to get it
Yeah.
into record.
Okay.
So,
Just hand it over to Anne Marie so that we'll
Okay.
have it.
I
All right.
think I've got somebody that will yield to me
Okay.
to be able to finish.
That's, okay, Gary Mumford.
Okay. 1504 Willow Drive. This high density, very high fit with our neighborhood, and it doesn't comply with city ordinance. The city ordinance relating to PRUD zoning says that new construction in already developed neighborhoods is to preserve the character of existing neighborhoods and to assure compatibility of new construction with existing neighborhoods. And then it uses the words, to the greatest extent possible, that the new construction should match the existing homes, the existing neighborhoods. Other housing developments that I'm thinking of have transitioned high density with the existing neighborhoods. So the proposed housing project south of Boondocks has larger lots next to the existing neighborhoods, is what I understand is being proposed. The Hill Farms, the phase that's next to 200 North Street, the lots to the east, which borders the existing neighborhoods, just match it perfectly. So they transition the higher density, and that's how I think they have met that requirement where it says to the greatest extent possible. I would encourage you to deny the zoning request, or if you decide to table it, I think I think that some smaller single-level homes would be ideal in this location. It'd be great for retired people or others with the closeness of the groceries and the exercise trail, and even the pickleball courts would be walkable. It could be an ideal location. Now, there's a lot of noise from the commercial area. For some reason the car alarms are always going off. I don't know if toddlers are playing with the keys in the store or what's happening, but those car alarms are always going off. But if you put one of those precast concrete fences along there, and if the homes are single level, then that would block the noise, I believe. Another direction you could probably give if you were tabling it is to that standard of 50 feet away from the pipeline. Apparently the pipeline owner can't enforce the standard, but you can enforce it. And, that's high-pressure gasoline, and it would probably be good to have that standard. I appreciate your consideration, your time.
Thank you.
Service.
Thank you.
Pat Stenquist.
Thank you, Pat Stanquist. I'm going to yield my time back to Steve Einfeld.
Okay.
And this won't be 3 minutes. Just to finish up, all homeowners in the area deserve to have their property values and their quality of life preserved. Residents deserve not to have greatly increased traffic congestion, noise, visual pollution, and other inherent problems. These good people with fewer houses on the green property, these good people want fewer houses on the green property. The Greens and Mr. Park want profit. They can still have profit. Let's compromise. I'm guessing neighbors are willing to compromise about half of the proposed number, say 12 to 14 townhouses, which is quadruple the number of current ordinance calls for. Greens and Mr. Park, are you willing to compromise to get part of what you want? You and the Greens, Mr. Park and the Greens, will still gain wealth, and the neighbors will still lose some, but hopefully not as much. The goal in these situations is peace, not bitterness. The current proposal will only result in anger and frustration. Let's be smart and use common sense here. A dozen or so units with some beautiful common green space, that could work. We greatly appreciate our elected officials performing wisely their fiduciary trust. We elected you. We also sincerely appreciate being heard and respected. Compromise in this case means that both sides will give up something, some of what they want, so that each gets a bit of what they want. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. We'll, would the applicant like to speak? 3 minutes.
Thank you for your time and consideration. A couple of things as we've been putting this plan together and been working through this whole thing is I think there's been a little bit of misunderstanding, thinking that everything is set in stone with this plan, and there's several things been brought up about what about detention and things of that nature. Right now, as you well understand, we are at the conceptual rezoning stage, and so all those things will be worked out, but we have to make sure that we have something to work out before we get to that point. So with that said, we've looked at this property we feel this is the highest and best use at this point in time. The general plan calls for and states that west of I-15, and I'm sure you're aware of this, 0 to 2 units with some higher density along major streets. And Second North is the most major street through Kaysville besides Main Street on the east side of I-15. So as we look at this, we understand that this zoning right here is a higher density, but yet once Legacy Highway continues on, once that it builds out further, this is a good area for this type of a development. I feel that we have taken 37 units out and dropped it down to 29. We've taken out, the 12 units there that, the 9 units that they've asked for, 8 units they've asked for, to reduce down the density when we went through the Planning Commission. So we've spent a lot of time trying to address some of the questions and concerns that the Planning Commission had. We have met with the neighbors on one occasion to get input from them. I understand this is a very sensitive and controversial project to go in here, but we also feel like if it's done right, that it can add great families to the area. It can add even great neighbors and people that would be able to, bring some goodness to the area. I think that this is a project that will allow young children to be here. It will also allow, we're close to the park, we're close to shopping, it's going to enhance the area. So, do you have any questions for me?
No? If we do, we'll come back to you.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks. Okay, council, questions? Councilmember Garn?
Go ahead.
Councilmember Barber.
I'm first going to restate a question. I know it's been brought up a few times, but even after listening to the Planning Commission and this, I'm still unclear on the north property, if that's being taken into consideration with this full project. If it's not, can you speak to that point?
Yes.
I would assume you.
Yeah. Mr. Park.
Mr. Park, thank you.
Yes. So, at this time, the northern piece will be owned, it will be a separate part. It will be owned by the HOA. And it will have just green space there. Currently, it is not fenced. Currently, anybody can walk in there and, access all the homes through the neighborhood, whatever they want to do. We're going to have a fence around the whole thing, and it will be titled separately. It will not be zoned in this same zone. Basically, it will still be part of the the Green Acres subdivision, and it will just be open space for the use of the members of the HOA. From the green property south, that will be rezoned to, that's what we're looking to rezone at this point in time. So the use on there will only be children playing, things of that nature. There will not be any structures. It will not be allowed. It will be maintained and lawns mowed, everything, and watered and maintained and taken care of by the HOA.
And as a follow-up question, and maybe this is for Lyle, does that park fall within compliance of the current CCNRs of that HOA?
We've looked at the HOA. We've had council advice on it. As long as we don't build anything in there, obviously we can put sidewalks. You can put sidewalks on easements. It's done quite often, and there is the CCNRs of the HOA. They're about 1.5 to 2 pages, and it controls a lot of the architecture that goes into the subdivision, but it does not address anything with being able to sell a piece of property off and use it as just open space.
Okay. And one follow-up or separate question, can you speak to the pipeline and the distance you have right now in this conceptual plan or that you plan on having?
The pipeline, and I don't have exact dimensions on that right there. The pipeline is it's 16.5-foot wide easement. And so that's where the pipeline exists, and so it comes across there. I'm assuming that building right there is probably 5 to 7 feet off of the easement right there.
I think you have a laser, or is there one there?
Oh, there it is, thank you. I'm assuming that's between 5 and 8 feet right there to the easement on that particular unit. This one, I'm guessing around 20-ish. Like I say, this is a conceptual design that we have had, and so that's where the pipeline is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, Councilmember Page.
Yeah, this is actually a question for Lyle, if possible. I guess the question I have is if the council decides, for example, to change the zoning on this, how does this affect the developer? I mean, does he have to go through the whole process again, or how does that work?
I'll probably ask a clarifying question to make sure. So if you're inclined to grant a different zone other than the R2 designation, might be the question. So not as common as a denial or outright acceptance, but where hearings have been held and a specific request has been made by a developer, the council can still grant a different zone than has actually been requested without starting the process over. So if an R110 or 1.8 or general commercial zone for some reason is what the process ends up pointing to, then the council would have the ability to grant that zone without restarting from scratch with a new application request from the applicant. However, I would suppose the applicant would determine if they want to continue and withdraw that application or not, if the owner would be willing to accept that zoning district.
Okay.
Okay.
Just a question.
Any other? Councilmember Adams.
So the subdivision to the north, is it a PRED? Does it have an HOA? No. So we're not robbing any open space out of that. Why is it going to be titled separately, the open space? What's the need for that?
Just because it's going to remain part of that subdivision, so we don't have to put the zoning up there on that. It's going to be titled in the HOA, but it's going to be under a different zone. And so we're going to have, I think the way that it's written in the development agreement is there's probably going to be 2 parcels. Is that how we did it, Lyle?
That's how
the lower parcel and the upper parcel, it's all going to be owned by the HOA, but it'll be just a different tax ID number or a different legal description. But it'll all be part of the HOA.
So obviously, to satisfy your open space agreement, you need that land, but
the open space agreement is actually satisfied by, I did some rough calculations, and with what we have there now on the lower 3 acres, it does satisfy the open space requirement. And so we are just adding to give some more open space to the subdivision.
I've got a question about, well, so the open space, I mean, in your agreement, it talks about it being an easement versus being owned. So you're going to change, you are going to...
At first, we had discussed being an easement and the Nooner family retaining fee simple ownership. But since then, I think we changed the agreement to say either easement or ownership rights, and we've elected to purchase the property.
Does anyone, Lyle, I mean, you don't have to be definitive, off the cuff, do we know what is the highest density in West Kaysville right now? Anybody have a
yeah, it's tricky because there are a couple developments, Schick Farm, Sunset Equestrian, that have some pockets that are probably 8 units an acre roughly. There's some patio home or smaller developments in some of their open space. So typically the subdivisions at large almost throughout the city are done at an overall density around the 2 units per acre. We've got a couple that are closer to 3. Hill Farms overall is about 2.5. So when looked at large, they're pretty low density developments. So you would just find those few pockets. The far west end of 200 North is the one that comes to mind on the north side of the street next to the park, where they've got, I think there are 5,000 square foot lots, give or take. But yet they were part of another larger development. So the overall development is still to the 2 unit per acre type density.
Thanks, Lyle.
Okay. Councilmember DeCare.
So, I guess a couple of questions. If a petroleum company is stating that a 50-foot easement is required and 16 and a half feet is something that we can probably get away with, that's something that, I mean, I personally don't feel really comfortable with granting something like that. Granted, I mean, again, to echo what you said earlier, what's before us tonight is the rezone, period, end of story. I mean, all this conceptual stuff is nice and that, but I guess, how come you're not looking at abiding to that 50-foot easement from that gas line on any of your conceptual documentation? I mean, outside of the obvious.
That's the reason being. If you look at Google Earth along that whole gas line there, all the way from Layton all the way to Kaysville, there's homes that are abutted right up next to that, up and down that easement.
But just because other communities have done it doesn't mean that we have to follow suit,
that?
though. I said just because other communities have done it doesn't mean that we need to follow suit.
No,
though.
I'm talking in Kaysville, all the way down through Kaysville. You know, if you look on Google Earth and going down through Kaysville, there are several homes that are 15, 20 feet off that easement, 10 or 15 feet off that easement. And so that is a recommendation, and that is something we would have to put on the plat, stating that, you know, these are the recommendations, and this is where the home is. It basically affects one or two of the units, it looks like.
Well, there's plenty more that aren't 50 feet away from it, though.
What's that?
So there's plenty more that aren't 50 feet away from it, though, of those, right?
Well, again, I don't have the scale, so, well, and there could be.
You can guess, though, I mean, right? I mean, you can take a guess at it, right? I mean.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You got the one up here on the corner, because these units are about 30 feet wide, so you got that one there and that one right there, and possibly that one, but
and
that's
then
why I say
down on the bottom too,
and possibly that one.
Right. Okay. All right.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Garn.
So I'm just curious why the R2 zone with PRU?
Well, that was in discussion with Lyle, and based upon staff's recommendation as to the type of units that we could put in here with the overlay. I believe it's similar to what Destination Homes did on the old Far West Motel. And so they actually have almost 13 units per acre on that piece, and it's the same size as this. They're about 3 acres up there, and I think they have 39, 40 units in there somewhere. And so they used that zoning and that overlay there, and so that was based purely on recommendation from staff.
Are you talking about the Destination Homes on 450?
Where the old West Motel used to be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the cross street there, but right there.
I thought that zone was RM zone.
So I'll pull up the zoning map for you.
Maybe I'm wrong, but we were basically going off of what staff.
Yeah, so maybe to that while I'm pulling this up. So when a applicant comes in looking for a project and they'll give us an idea, you know, I'd love to do large lots, I'd love to do townhomes, you name it. Typically we'll give a recommendation of the zone that's just accommodates it and not extra above that. So that's where the R2 recommendation came from. And then knowing the configuration, we let them know the process that would require a PRUD type approval as well. Typically we don't tell them which project to do from staff. But this is the Far West Motel site just off of Main Street with an R4 zoning designation. There are some RMs right behind Vasa. There's a project under construction, and right behind Biker's Edge, I believe, is also an RM zoning designation. And it gets, I believe, up to about 15.5 unit per acre in the RM, around 14 or so with the R4. Are some of the differences there.
Okay, so that's a little bit of a discrepancy because the zoning map, and maybe I didn't look at it in the right place, but it shows as of January 2019 that location is RM, or residential multifamily. And then there's those have 5 units together in the Old World Motel as well. So, and you mentioned the zone at 200 West, 250 North also is an RM zone.
Correct, yeah. So I believe that's the site directly behind the Vasa, and the post office does have an RM zoning designation.
Okay, this R2 zone, the base zone, without the PRUD, has a limit of, can have 1 or 2 units attached, right? Well, 1 would be detached, I guess, but could have 2 units detached. So it's the PRUD that allows it to go from 2 up to, in this case, 7. 2 buildings at 4, 1 at 3, 1 at 6, 1 at 5.
That's correct. So if it were a standard R2 zoning designation, lots could go as small as 8,000 square feet, but you could have a duplex essentially or a twin home on that lot. And if you were doing a twin home type development, you could split the lot in half. So essentially you have 1 unit on 4,000 square feet. So you get about 10,000 square feet, or sorry, 10 lots per acre. The difference is the configuration. So each one of those lots would have to meet that minimum size and frontage requirement and abut a public street. The PRUD overlay, it does a couple things. It allows for when lots are platted individually, which is the proposal here. So even though they're attached, they're no longer considered 2, 3, or 4 family dwelling units. They are single family dwelling units, but single family attached units. So they can come in configurations such as proposed, grouped in townhomes 2, 4, 6. Again, if acceptable to the council. The PRUD also allows for private street use, requires open space be provided, and can give some discretion and flexibility in setbacks and similar items through the consideration of the council.
So help me understand that distinction a little bit between multifamily, because normally the base zone would only allow 2 family units. In this case, we have a maximum of 7 proposed. But you're saying that those are still single family but attached. So what's the difference between a single family attached and multifamily?
Well, it's partly building code, but also just each individual unit would have its own individual tax ID. So it's a common designation, user code, and specifically spelled out within our PRUD ordinance. For example, without the PRUD, you could put 2 homes on 1 lot, 1 tax ID, a true duplex, whether that's an upstairs, downstairs separate or distinction or side by side, maybe 1 address, or it could be shared metering and so forth with utilities, but you couldn't split ownership. And so that 4-plex and 8-plex, we have many of those in this neck of the town. Those would be examples of multifamily, at least according to code, units or structures. But these would be considered just by definition single family, clearly attached rather than single family detached.
Thank you. So in the PRUD zone itself, there's various standards, and one of them, maybe I'll start with how maybe this question for Mr. Park, how does is adding up if you have 2,600 square feet per unit, and the largest one has 7, which also happens to be closest to the other residential neighborhood, has 7 times about 2,600, so that's about close to 19,000 square feet. The building itself, all attached, a 19,000 square foot building. And in the PRUD code, it says to the greatest extent possible, it's meant to maintain the established mass, scale, height, width, and form of surrounding buildings. Now, clearly, if we compare it to the Smith's Marketplace, it meets that standard, but the surrounding homes are maybe between 3,600 to 5,000 square feet, something like that, and they're mainly ramblers, compared to a building that is 2-story, all contiguous, connected together, 18,900, or I shouldn't do the math in my head, I did it before, but about 19,000 square feet. So roughly 4 to 5 times the size, twice the height, many multiples the width of the existing, at least residential buildings.
What you have to look at, and it's just like what Lyle said, is the building code and also county records. Each one of those, even though they're attached, each one of those units is 2,600, and that includes garage space also.
Okay,
so
I understand that, but I don't see anywhere in this part of the PRUD ordinance in 1734-1 where it discusses tax IDs or a legal description of the building. It just says the mass, scale, height, width, and form compared to the surrounding buildings. I don't think that's tied to a tax ID.
Well, because if you've got a property line right there dividing that unit in half, then the one unit is only the 2,600 and some odd square feet. Now, the whole building as a whole, yes, but the way that the county looks at it, the county doesn't tax that whole building as a 19,000 square foot building. The county taxes each unit individually. And so each one of those is an individual unit, as does real estate law. Real estate law looks at each one of those as an individual unit.
So you're telling me that when we look at this building that's twice the height, 4 times the width, and a much different size of building, that we should separate in our minds the legal description and say, well, the 1 unit fits the mass, scale, height, width, and form of the
I'm just telling you
surrounding
how the county and the law dictates each one of those buildings. And then that's how, you know, the PRUD overlay can accommodate these townhomes from the city ordinance, and I'm getting that from, obviously, city staff. And so that's the direction that we've been led, and that's the direction that we have been given to go in order to show the individual unit. Yes, it can still be attached, but it's just a single individual unit. Not one person is occupying that whole building.
Okay, and yeah, I acknowledge the point you're making. I'm just wondering if, you know, given this ordinance doesn't really discuss the tax ramifications, if you feel that that's, you know, reasonable, I guess, given that the building itself is, of course, much larger than their surrounding buildings.
Well, and obviously that is part of a townhome development and part of a multifamily housing development, is you are going to get larger buildings in order to fit in smaller spaces, you know, smaller spaces that we have here to address the issues of rising house costs and affordable housing and things of that nature. And so, you know, you have to balance those two. Obviously, I didn't write the ordinance, but I'm going off of what staff has recommended.
Well, it would seem, would you agree that this is pretty subjective assessment, though? I mean, it doesn't say 2, 3, 4 times the mass, size, weight, width, height. It just says it should be considered, and to the largest extent possible, it should be maintained with the existing neighborhood. So it is a somewhat subjective assessment. So you could almost say anything in that regard, and the city council could decide, I think, within the ordinance to approve that. But after listening to all the planning commission meetings, I don't recall, and if I'm wrong, that this specific thing, I think there was one comment made, if I'm not in error, Lyle, that this was a subjective assessment, and then no further assessment was made. But I don't know that that's really been discussed, and so I wanted to bring that up later. That's not really a question, but we can discuss that later. Did you have a comment, Lyle?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say it's several meetings, so I may be missing comments that were made, but yeah, I don't believe that the massing or scale of the structures was certainly a key topic during planning commission meetings, to my recollection.
Okay, and of course another part of the purpose of a PRUD, and I think this is one thing I struggled with when I looked at the purpose of the PRUD. I struggled to find, in going through all the criteria, where this purpose was met. You know, it's not a wetland, it is a little bit odd shaped, so sometimes we use the zone LD for that purpose too, where, you know, the land is sort of odd shaped, and so we don't want just a straight 20,000 square feet R120, for example, in that zone. So we're going to allow for some flexibility. So that's one of the things there that I think would make sense in this development. And you know, that you would have to do something like that, and it would probably be very difficult to put actually half-acre lots and make them work on that lot. But having said that, one of the things here it says that I would ask as a question is, bringing in the 1734-1, how does this design assure greater compatibility with the existing neighborhood as required in 1734-1?
And that's under the PRUD ordinance?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we are introducing a new product out there. I mean, it is going to be somewhat different, and I get that. But we are going to also bring in the architectural and structural elements of the area of West Kaysville and use the brick and stucco and stone and the hardy plank in order to make the architecture blend in.
Okay, and another question on that, though, to your point, it does say in the same ordinance purpose, 1734-1, how does this design give a variety of dwelling types and site arrangement plans, giving imagination and variety in the physical pattern of the development? So, but it says within the development, and I don't know that I really see a variety in dwelling types, site arrangements, or imagination in that regard, like some of the other developments that have already been discussed, where there was some buffering, et cetera, et cetera.
You know, and I get where you're going at, but we haven't even designed the full buildings on this yet. We've got some conceptual stuff that we've put together. And so a lot of this is going to have to come up once we get, just like capacity of water lines, capacity of sewer lines, how big, how large do they have to be? How much storm drain retainage do we have to do? You know, all of that is within the ordinance that we have to meet. But right now, we are just, and those questions will be answered when we come to, you know, preliminary plat.
Thanks, that's fair enough. I just have a couple more, Mayor, if that's okay.
Okay.
So there's mitigating factors under the PRUD code. There's additional criteria, and it mentions things like a harmonious arrangement of buildings. I just went to the next page. Let me see if I can go back. Oh, there we go. And then impacts on privacy of adjacent properties. And then it gives some mitigating factors that you can do, including fencing, landscaping, building placement, height, mass, building design, such as the number of stories, reduction in density is one of the items. So with it being so close up to property lines with the setbacks and side yards and whatnot, under 1734-5, how is the privacy of adjacent properties assured, given that there are 2 stories and you're talking about a 6-foot fence?
Well, exactly that. For example, in the subdivision just north, I mean, I think their setbacks are 8 and 10, and 2-story homes are allowed. Quite often, that is something that's in every subdivision, whether you've got a half-acre lot or not. Your setbacks are typically 8 and 10. You can bring your house up, and so if you've got a 2-story home, how is that homeowner doing? You know, it's the same. It's a similar use. And I would imagine that same question is in the other ordinances or the other zoning areas of even larger subdivisions. And so, yes, we will mitigate that through fencing and through landscaping.
But is that something you would consider? So, if, for example, if this body were to table this and say, come back and work on some things, you know, we don't want to delay it too much or send it back or whatever, and we were to say that, what would be some of the things that you would consider? You know, perhaps a reduction in density, perhaps, because I do find that interesting. I get that if you include the easement area, that's one thing that the Planning Commission talked about is reduction in density. However, after the hearings in the 3rd meeting, they didn't really bring density up again, and it was never mentioned that the density of the area where the homes are actually increased from 9.1 to 9.66 per acre. And so I don't know that that redesign ever took place at the Planning Commission stage. What types of things could you do to maybe make this still a higher density area, you know, close in proximity to the Smiths, but not quite the massive structures that, you know, raise questions about the PRUD requirements?
As we've looked at this, we've run many different scenarios. We've been to Planning Commission 3 times, and you know, as we're trying to make this project something that's financially viable, I mean, that is an issue, and to make it something that looks great out in West Kaysville and that people would be willing to buy and move into. I don't know if there's a whole lot more besides taking units out that we could do to accommodate what you've been asked, what you ask. You
Would-
know,
would
we
it be
could try
financially-
and split the
Sorry.
7-unit building up, but then that's going to, then you have setback issues between buildings and whatnot. And so that would create, you know, more spacing there and probably end up having to take out a unit. And like I say, we've massaged this as much as we could. I know that we went from 37 to 29 because we had the other acreage up on top that we were using. But still, 9 units per acre is still a lot less than, for example, like Destinations project that they did up there. There's other projects around in different cities that go anywhere from, you know, 12 to 16 units per acre. And I get that we're not other cities, and I understand that. But as what I'm saying is 9 units per acre in the general plan, when it states that higher density, it doesn't describe what higher density is. It doesn't say, hey, we will not allow townhomes out here. It just says along major streets we will allow higher density. Is higher density 100? Is higher density 4? Is it 3? I don't know what it is. So that's why we proposed this. And we
That's
feel
very
like
true. And I do have one more question for you, and then I'll turn it back to the mayor. But in the general plan, since you bring that up, it says that about 10% of the housing in Kaysville should be multiple unit structures, mostly consisting of duplexes, and some 3 to 6 unit structures. So I thought that was interesting because the max, given the general plan is not an ordinance, but gives guidance.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of fall in that some, you know, 3 to 6 with 1 being 7, so 1 over the general plan. So in this plan structure, we do have the 7-unit thing. Let's see. I'm just wondering though, in this situation, so I got to be careful not to make a comment. Certainly just acknowledge that there are higher density structures and everything is relative, right? But placement is important too. Where is the development going? And I would just ask, do you feel like, again, last time, that this is doing our best to maintain the existing mass height, width, et cetera, under the PRUD?
Now, what's the question? You said, are we doing our best to what?
I'll just drop that question because I've already asked that question. So, but I did want to kind of bring in the
Okay.
general plan as well.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Councilmember Garn. Thank you, Mr. Park.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. I will entertain a motion at this time.
Well, Mayor, I'll propose that we table the zoning, the rezone request of 3 acres at property 1576 West, 200 North, and maybe bring it up to our next meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay. It's been moved by Councilmember Page and seconded by Councilmember DeCare. Comments at this time. Now, yes, Lyle, did you have something to say before we have comments?
Just getting ready in case questions are asked. Sorry.
Okay.
Getting excited.
All right. Okay, Councilmember Barber.
I have a lot of comments on the development as a whole, but first comment on the motion. Do we want to give further?
Date certain?
What was that?
It would be the 18th of April.
Yeah, date for sure. But do we want to give specific recommendations?
Context.
Right.
Just that it's a tabling?
In your comments, please share what you would hope to find.
Okay. All right.
All right.
That's what I was looking for. So I'll go ahead and I have a lot to say on this. And first of all, thank you to the community. These are interesting opportunities for us. This is kind of a, like we said, first of its kind in this area. So thank you to the developer and the residents that have all contacted us. If you haven't heard back from at least me specifically, I'm sorry about that. I've tried to get in touch with everyone. I think we've learned a lot. This is a new grounds. Obviously, there's a lot of emotions at stake, especially when you have something so close to you. I, for one, think we have the opportunity to see a really good compromise in this area. Hopefully, we can continue working on it, I think, with tabling the item and continuing to see what's best for this area. So thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Wasn't a lot of
let's-
comments.
That was, maybe there's more. You never know.
Right. Councilmember Page.
Hey, just a few things. First of all, I just want to say the same thing on the aspect of this has been a process, and I've attended most of the planning commission meetings that we've had, and I know not only emotion, all of us have received many emails, and I think we have a pretty good grasp of what the citizens' concerns are that live around this project as well. I'm just going to say three different things, my take on it, and I think that's what we want. We want to be specific, right?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. You know, I think that's the thing. First of all, and number one, when we talk about the density, I'll be honest with you, that doesn't taste good to me, 29 units in that much area. But on the other hand, half-acre lots doesn't feel good to me either. And I think that this is a place where we can have some higher density than what we have around the existing area, because I think that just its position and being on a busy road, and also where it's at, I think it'll be very sellable. And on top of that, heaven knows that Kaysville City is not an affordable city anymore. And I think that this gives us an opportunity to maybe have some people that would have zero chance of living in our city and have an opportunity to have a new home. And I think that there's a great demand for that. And so I'd like to say that. And then on this pipeline, I actually live right next to a high-pressure pipeline, the one that's full of jet fuel, pretty explosive. And I tell you what, it's not 16.5 feet. And I'm concerned about that. When they were putting that in about 3 years ago, they put a new line in that pipeline. And I was talking to the people when they were doing it. When they have a 16.5-foot easement, there's no guarantee that that line's in the middle of that 16.5-foot easement. It just has to be within the easement. It could be on the east side, it could be on the west side, it could be right on the border of that easement. And when they replace those lines, which this one is quite old, and they'll be going through this process someday, they do not remove the old pipelines. They use that. They don't shut these things down. They'll put a new line in, and wherever they need to put it, and sometimes it's right on the edge. And then they'll test them, and they'll put the fuel into the new line, and then they will not take out the old one. They leave it in there as a backup. That's just how they do it. In mine, I would recommend that we adopt the PHMSA standard of 50 feet on this particular one, for not only for the citizens of Kaysville, but because there are some homes quite close to this, and I mean, that's one of my feelings on this. And then also just the one thing, I'm concerned about the buffeting, to be able to have a buffer there. I put myself in position, and I'm not saying that you just have a bunch of land, or I'm not saying, I'm saying that we leave this up to the developer to decide what they want to do. It's their land. They have the right to develop this the way they want to. But I can see where the people are coming from as well. I would not want to have a 30-foot building right next to the property line, right next to my home either. And I think that there's good ways of doing this to benefit. So I think a compromise and then look at some of these areas to make this project even better, because there is no doubt in my mind that this is going to be a well-selling project, and it'll be snatched up fast, because Kaysville is a great place to live, and there's a great demand for this as well. And that's all my comments.
Thank you. Councilmember DeCare.
Just a few things. So I spent 6 years on the Planning Commission before I got here, and so I've seen developers when given an opportunity to have a compromise in a situation like this, be able to work things and to make things agreeable for all parties. Obviously, there is, there's some give, there's some take, but I think, over the past several months that I've been following this, and like Councilmember Page, I've attended Planning Commission meetings and I've read up on this and I've made myself pretty well apprised of this. I think that there are situations in place here in this particular rezone request where the developer can possibly look at things from a slightly different angle, possibly a different zone, maybe an RM zone or an R18 zone, possibly. It may be a little more restrictive, but I think that we could make that work. An R2 zone, not only in this area on the west side of Kaysville, but in Kaysville in general, an R2 zone would certainly set an absolute precedent here for Kaysville. And I think that we can take a look at this and, possibly come up with some kind of a compromise and make this work. So I've received all the emails from the residents. I've actually, in my years of community service here, I've spoken to a lot of the folks that live in that particular area. I appreciate all your comments, all your concerns. So, I mean, and from what I read, from the vast majority that I read, that a compromise is in order here. I think that it's, nobody's slamming their fist on the table saying that, we're going to shove this through or we're going to deny this. I mean, I spoke and talked to several residents who said, I'm okay with something going in here. It just needs to be a little bit different than what's being proposed right now. So I think through some goodwill from the developer and from the city and from the residents, that triangulation can come up to something that's positive and good for our entire city. So that's where I stand on this.
Thank you. All right, Councilmember Garn, anything?
Yes, thank you. First of all, let me say thanks to the developer, Mr. Park, for enduring all my many questions. And I'm confident that I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with what's proposed. I mean, I'm sure it would be very nice. Townhomes are great. They certainly have their place. And as you pointed out, there are many of them all around, and they work very well. And some people like to live in that type of housing, and it works. Even the same people at different ages, at different times in their lives. So certainly there's nothing inherently wrong with what's proposed at all, until you consider where it's being placed. Now, in the one case, it's near the Smiths, which kind of does argue for a little higher density. So I would be fine with that. I don't really see how you could put half-acre lots in there and make it work. But maybe half the density you're proposing, around five units per acre, between somewhere around 15 units or in that range, might be an appropriate sort of scale down from the existing neighborhood to the Smiths. And then I don't want to reiterate what Councilmember Page already said, but I feel strongly on the 50 feet from the gas line as well. I remember when I was in college, I was in accounting, but I took one city planning course, and the professor took us on a tour, and we looked at various zoning decisions that cities had made, which I still remember a lot of that, but the one that sticks in my mind was when he showed us the houses that had been zoned on a hill on fill. And he said, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when that house is at the bottom of that hill. So of course, maybe even in Kaysville, there's cases where an approval was given on a zone that was closer to that than 50 feet, but that's the recommendation of Tesoro. And I just would not be the one that would want to vote, yes, I'm okay with it being closer than 50 feet. So let's do it right as far as that's concerned. So I think That about sums it up. Maybe as far as specific direction, I've given sort of a number of density that I think would be appropriate there, and maybe some consideration to the general plan where it talks about predominantly duplexes with some higher, 3 to 6. I realize it has to work on the land there, but hopefully that's still financially viable for you as the developer to scale it down, keep it nice, and still keep kind of the concept of a little higher density, but maybe not quite the units that are proposed and the placement of them being all together in one large building. So that's where I stand.
Okay. And I'll just say that I fully support a variety of housing options in Kaysville, and there's two types of people in Davis County: those who live in Kaysville and those who want to live in Kaysville. And so I appreciate the attempt to get a different housing type, especially in this part of Kaysville. I think that it's probably not going to be as aggressive as you envisioned, but it's still going to make a difference if you're able to accommodate some of the requests from the neighbors and council. Thank you for being brave and being the first ones to try this. But any other comments? Anything?
I just have one additional I forgot. It's
yes.
Real quick. There was some comparison in the Plan Commission meetings to some of the other higher development areas, and there is an area of town which I felt strongly we should have a little higher density located throughout the city, because it's doesn't make sense. That's what our general plan says, and you've got everything right there in this Mutton Hollow area. But I would just point out that those two things were mentioned, but if you look at the Old World Motel and the destination home units that are there, there's a pretty substantial buffer to the other homes there of a gully and lots of trees and maybe 200 feet or so. I was just eyeballing it the other day. But then when you look at the more recent development about 2 or 3 years ago that we approved, that was a little higher density, and there was a lot of public outcry at that point. That was approved, but I think that's distinct from this one in that if you look at those units, they're two detached. They're basically twin homes. And so, and also the density in that area is already higher. I mean, the whole area is higher, so the jump from there to the duplexes is, quite a bit less. So just comparing it to other areas of Kaysville, this would be a pretty dramatic change, not just for West Kaysville, but for most of East Kaysville as well.
Thank you. All right.
I have
one more thing. Sure, go for it.
I don't want to take more specific comments that I had, not as much on the emotion, is I know this is just the rezone phase. I understand that, and we're not quite to the final development agreement, but there were still some unknowns that I think as feedback would be really nice to have. We talked about detention a little bit, but some more specifics on that. Parking, I know that came up, and I don't see it reflected differently from what Planning Commission recommended, and I think that's a really big one, especially where it's a busy area right there. So as feedback, and then just the more flexibility, the broad discretion that we talked about with the PRUD. I think we have the opportunity to do a little bit better or a little bit different final product. And I also, to echo Mayor Witt's point, when we think about, I've been proud of our community as we've come around to the idea of having homes that maybe look different than the ones that we live in, that we're close to, and the asset that it can be to the community if it's done right. So, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry that this stream of consciousness.
Okay.
But one more, I think this might be helpful to the developer. In my mind, that's just speaking as one council member, I'm not sure that you necessarily need to change the zone, because you can tie the development agreement to whatever zone. So it could be that if you decide to rework this and go forward, that you do so by being more specific in the development agreement, and then tie that to the land. So, thanks.
Okay, very good. All right, last chance for a comment. Want to comment, Councilmember Adams? Nope. Okay, let's go to a vote. Councilmember Gurn.
Aye.
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 I think we're being pretty vague. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you much. All right, we're going to go to a call to the public. There's a 3-minute limit. Just one. Yes?
Mayor, just for a
Yes.
clarification on that previous motion, so I think it was stated tabled to the 18th
Yes.
as part of the conversation?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right, first we have Richard Proctor.
I'm back again.
Well, we're glad.
You're going to get to see me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a constitutionalist. Let me just be very clear. Our nation was established as a republic, not a democratic republic, not a democracy. We are a republic. Ben Franklin was asked, what did you guys establish? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. Have we kept it? Let me just point out some things. We really need to be a republic. There's one federal government, 50 state governments, over 3,000 county governments, and tens of thousands of city governments. And the only ones in that whole list that are still republics are the city councils. Nothing else is a republic. Nothing. The counties, they don't have any representation. That's not a republic. We've wiped out the republic in the federal government because the Constitution says there'll be 30,000 people represented, not 700,000, which is where it is today. Guys, we've lost it. We have lost our republic. We've got to learn about these things and start putting them down. UN is a big part of why we're doing things. UN is a big part of some of the destruction of our country. What have we done? Even back, let me see, I have a minute and a half still. I've got this much to do. So I'm going to give you copies of this, guys. But anyway, the Constitution was ratified in 1788. By 1824, there had been 10 major violations of the Constitution by the founders themselves. Think about that. 30,000 was the number per person in the Constitution. 2 years later, they changed it to 50 without an amendment or any discussion. It was changed to 50. That's the first major violation. The next one after that was giving the power to a private company to control our lives through finance. Now that one had a 20-year charter, so it was shut down in 1811. The next one in 16 wasn't shut down except for President Jackson. He shut that thing down in 36. Done. What did they do? They caused a recession. The people who want that kind of government, caused a recession and destroyed some of our economy in the 37 and 38. Oh, guys, I could go on. I'll just pass this out to you.
Thank you.
We need to be more cognizant of what the Constitution says. And some of what we discussed today isn't cognizant of the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Proctor.
Thank you.
Douglas Adelot.
I respectfully request that BJ Bell be able to speak first, and then I can take
I
his
can do
question.
that.
That would be
I
okay?
can do that. Mhm.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Beauregard James Bell. I'm the founder of a tech company, Items to Share Incorporated, and a 19-year resident of Kaysville City. I'm representing the Bells and the people of Shepherd Lane. Mayor and City Council, we request that the residents' concerns on the Shepherd Lane Improvement Project be placed on the agenda for an official item for discussion. Some of those concerns we'll cover tonight. We need the council to help us understand why the requirements for the improvements on Shepherd Lane are different than Burton Lane. First, renovations made, I believe last year on Burton Lane, did not require the installation of a sidewalk. It is our understanding that the road improvements on Burton were completed prior to Shepherd because Burton has more traffic. If that is the case, why no sidewalks? Second, the cost for the curb and gutter on Burton was approximately $17 a linear foot. The city, we feel, not in good faith, originally quoted $60 a linear foot. Councilman DeCare did some research and informed us that the city informed us the city provided this number as a worst-case scenario. That is BS. Why would the Shepherd Lane residents not be responsible for $60 a linear foot 1 year later? Adding sidewalk would not increase it by $43 a linear foot. We feel the city realized their number was ridiculous and came back with a revised number of not to exceed $37 a linear foot. Can you explain the 35% increase on the curb and gutter? We feel it is due to the labor shortage and premium construction costs, which we should not be responsible for. We are being financially penalized because our project was not completed last year. We should be charged a reasonable cost of not to exceed $30 a linear foot. Any cost over $30 a linear foot should be covered by Kaysville City, which can come from the storm drain fees we have paid monthly with our utility bills since we moved to Shepherd Lane, currently $8 a month. Shepherd Lane residents will also be financially responsible to restore their yards back to original condition. Thus, another reason not to exceed $30 a linear foot. Fourth, due to the labor shortage, Shepherd Lane residents need to see in writing that there will be liquidated damages to the contractor if the project is not completed on time. Any liquidated damages will be credited to the balance owed by the homeowners due to the inconvenience and not the city's budget. On a personal note, my family, along with one other family, has 2 to 3 times more frontage. The payback time should be determined based on the frontage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Adelot?
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm Douglas Adelot. I live at 258 East Shepherd Lane, Kaysville. Just wanted to say that we would respectfully request that we have an opportunity to have the Shepherd Lane project put on the council agenda so that the citizens that live on Shepherd Lane could come and speak, share some of our thoughts, some of our concerns. I know when I met, well, actually I was corresponding with Zoe Rogich, which is with the Landon Group. Back in October on the 25th, I asked her specifically how is it going to be paid for, and she came back and said, well, Kaysville's going to pay for it out of the storm, water, utility, and roads budget. Well, I was really happy about that, right? Because that meant it wasn't going to come out of my pocket. And of course, she didn't have good information, and that's not correct. And of course, we've met with Josh back on the 16th of January. Josh Belknap, your Public Works Director, he answered a lot of things. We're now being asked to sign an agreement. I think some people have kind of stonewalled it. I know I've got a meeting that I've got to schedule to look at it. I actually have a copy that I got the person to send me early. And so we just would like to have that chance to talk, to ask some more questions, to understand more completely how this agreement will work.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Randy Van Bozy. It's been a while. Glad you're here.
Randy Van Bozy. I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you. I spoke at the Planning Commission meeting about incorporating more high-density housing into the west side of Kaysville. I won't repeat my comments because that won't be necessary, but I appreciate the efforts to have an open discussion about what this could look like. My concern began a couple years back when I was looking into federal regulations on housing, that there's kind of a wrong side of the railroad tracks kind of law, that you cannot have any rules in place that restrict people from living in certain areas of town. And ever since then, I have really felt like our regulations saying that we will only have 2 homes per acre creates that kind of regulation. And I've been very concerned about it. And I am grateful to see that we're going in a new direction, or at least trying to. I still have concerns when we talk about maybe this development needs to become 5 acres per unit. That's the size of my starter house. A single family dwelling was on 0.2 acres. if we are truly, truly looking at making an impact on who can come into our city, I would hope that we would push this to at least 7 homes per acre. And I know that that's a push, and I know that there's an argument about it not being contiguous with the rest of the neighborhood, but what I would have to say is that it has to start somewhere, and there will always be a neighborhood on the other side of it. But if we don't take the opportunities where we have them, we're going to regret it 20 years down the line. So I appreciate the compromise and the discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you. Just as a point, in public comment, the council doesn't answer back, but if you can hold on, I will talk to you after the meeting. We are almost finished. All right, council member reports. How about Public Works?
No report today.
Okay. How about, yes?
Parks and Rec, we have our Easter egg hunt coming April 20th. Our Youth City Council has some exciting things planned for that, so be watching. We have a whole new slew of spring sports coming up, and also we have the opening of Pioneer Park that is coming soon. I don't know. We'll just leave it at that. So.
It's going to be...
Can we say it?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
May 16th. So 5:30, ribbon cutting, and it's going to be a fantastic evening that we're all really excited about. Can I say the other part?
Yeah.
Are we committed to that? And it's a city council night as well, which will be held at the park.
Oh, actually,
Come on.
It's not going to be at the
Okay,
park.
fine. I really wanted it.
It would have been fun.
Yeah.
But we're
having a party there.
We are having a party, but we're going to run back and have city council meeting. Sorry about that.
Well, everyone knows my cool idea.
Yeah, it would have been really fun.
It would have been fun.
Councilmember DeCare, anything?
Power, we've kicked our meeting from the first Tuesday of April because of a conflict with spring break. We've moved it back a week, so I don't have a calendar in front of me, but I think it's the 10th of April. Oh, here, hold on a second, I can tell you right now. So instead of the 2nd, we're meeting on the 9th. So the 9th of April will be our next scheduled Power Commission meeting. And Youth Court, I was here last night until about 7:30 or so last night with Youth Court. That's moving along well, too. So.
All right, thank you. Community development.
Yeah, just mentioning last Tuesday, we had an open house for our remodel here on this building, and I think we had a great turnout, and I think that the wonderful part about it is we had a lot of diversity in the people and a lot of good ideas, and we had a follow-up meeting the next day, and a lot of, to be honest with you, a lot of the ideas that came forward is in front of the architects now, and I think it was a great event. Appreciate that people are willing to get involved.
Yeah, thank you. I want to mention that our city council meeting that would be on April 3rd is canceled because it's spring break. So our next meeting will be on the 18th of April. And also, good news, several good newses. First of all, the state allocated $6 million to the connector road between West Davis Corridor and I-15. So we're getting very close to having all the funding together for that. Second good news is we were awarded a TLC grant of $25,000 to help us with our general plan update. So lots of effort from city staff to get all these things put together. Appreciate them hustling to help us meet our needs. City manager report.
I was just going to mention the April 4th meeting canceled, so you got it.
Okay, also. Okay, move to adjourn, anyone?
I move we adjourn.
Any second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you.